So my son's birthday's coming up and I wanted to get him a Switch for his birthday. He's young, I didn't want to get him a nice one, so I looked around locally, found one that was pretty beat up and pretty cheap. Not wanting to give it to him in that condition, looked on Amazon and found that Extreme Rate offers transparent shells, and it turned out so well that I got one for my daughter's Switch and my own. These original Switches were a breeze, but the OLED was a total pain in the butt, so stick around to the end when we do the Switch OLED to really know what you're getting into here. I have an Arduino-based project I'm working on, and this video sponsor PCBWay offered to help me out. They offer services like custom PCBs, assembled PCBs, CNC machining, and 3D printing. In fact, I'm planning on using their enormous build volumes they offer. If you're like me and need a supplier which doesn't require minimum order quantities in the thousands, then PCBWay can help you out and get your project off the ground. There's so much to look at. I encourage you to click on the link below in the description and see for yourself. If you use them in a project, tell me about it in the comments. I'd love to take a look. First, make sure you have all your parts and tools before you begin. To get started, there are 4 Y-wing screws on the back of each Joy-Con. Unscrew each one and set it in a spot where you can organize where the screws came from. Once all the screws are out, you should be able to pull it apart with little to no effort. Unscrew the slide rail from the back piece and just pull it away. I removed all 5 screws listed here, but only 3 actually hold this middle piece in. At this point, you can very carefully remove every ribbon cable on the board. I didn't get good footage, but look to see how it opens and gently slide it out. The buttons are keyed and can only go in one way. However, the arrows are all keyed the same way, so if you're using colors, make sure it matches the other Joy-Con. You can just peel away the rumble pack and move it over. Remove 2 of the yellowed screws out of the case, and once those are done, gently pull the joystick through. Use tweezers to pull off the gasket and move it over to the new plastic. Then push the joystick through and screw it back in. Remove the 3 screws holding in the button board at the top of the controller. Once you move it over, be sure to move the button plastic over as well, and that spring is in the correct spot. Once the joystick and buttons are in place the PCB where it needs to go, and start connecting the ribbon cables. Do this very gently, and once it's in the correct position, make sure to latch each one in place. I could not get good footage of removing this button on every attempt, so what you need to do is get tweezers or a flathead in there and pull it away. It's just held on with a dimple. Then move it over, along with the little button contact, place the springs in the correct little spots, and snap it back into place. Once the last of the ribbon cables are connected, fold over the battery holder in place, screw it in place, and put the battery in it. Getting close to the end, now let's screw in the slide rail onto the back piece of plastic, and the bottom only sets in a hole. There's no screw at the bottom. Press fit it together, and then we're going to re-add those 4 tri-wing screws. And then we're done. Once all together, test your input on the Switch itself. Later on, we're going to use the actual input test method that Nintendo supplies in the settings menu. The right Joy-Con is a little different inside, but we start with the 4 tri-wing screws on the outside again. Once those are removed, again, it should just peel apart nice and easy. Then we have the one screw holding in the slide rail. Pull it apart from the back plastic, and you can set that aside. Peel away the battery from the plastic. There's also an antenna on this side that you need to pull away too. The middle plastic on the right side here only has 3 screws holding it in, 2 at the top, 1 at the bottom. Then you can pull it away. I got very lucky here. There's a ribbon cable connecting that button that has no slack in it. Continue unscrewing and removing the PCB from the Joycon. And also remove all the remaining ribbon cables. Now's a good time to remove the rumble pack and move it over to the new controller, along with the IR emitter. Just like the left Joy-Con, there's 2 screws holding in the joystick. There's a gasket under here that you need to be careful with, along with another black plate. Peel them away and move them to the new controller. Once you've added all the buttons again, we can place the PCB where it needs to go and gently start reattaching ribbon cables. These 2 on the side are pretty tricky because again there's no slack. I also did this on the left Joy-Con, but we're going to replace a plastic tab that locks the Joy-Con to the Switch because over time they do fail. So the cover is just press fit in and can be pried away. Make sure when you remove this plastic tab you take note of where that spring is and do not lose it. Re-add the metal tab in the same orientation, being careful to get the spring back in place. Then just press fit and re-screw in that cover as well. Carefully reattach the ribbon cables that are coming off the slide rail. In my experience, typically the yellow screws are the ones that go directly into the plastic. So we have 3 of those here to reattach the middle plastic that holds the battery. Once the antenna is back in place, be sure to route its wire through the notches following the battery and the corner. That'll help it hold in place. Screw in the slide rail to the back piece. And again, the bottom is just sitting in a hole. There's no screw at the bottom. Once you have that done, let's take our 4 tri-wing screws, screw it down nice and snug, but don't over torque. Finally, in the settings menu, you'll find test input devices, test controller, and you can start pressing buttons on the Joy-Cons. There are a few that can't be tested here. It's listed in the instructions, but for example, screenshot, home, power, and volume. We're going to start with the easy backplate, the switch backplate. There's 4 tri-wing screws on the back, 2 on the side, 1 on the top, 2 on the bottom, and 1 just under the kickstand. If you don't know which ones actually need to be removed, I used the backplate that we're going to put in and looked for where the holes were, and those are the screws that we need to remove. With the final screw removed, it should come off without any issues at all. If you have to force it, you probably missed a screw. We're going to start by applying the vent grills to the back of the switch. Once those are in place, we need some foam in these locations. I had to double them up. The kickstand is held in with 1 screw and the assembly with 2 other screws. The metal is just press fit into the plastic for the kickstand itself. Repeat the process to reinstall. The cartridge holder just has 1 screw and make sure it still wiggles. Finally, press fit the new cover in. You shouldn't have any resistance anywhere, and start re-adding the screws. The OLED is going to be a significant amount of work here. We have those 4 tri-wing screws again on the back, 1 on each side, 1 at the top, 2 at the bottom. There's more tabs here than the other switch, so very gently start to separate the plastic from the front of the switch. Once it is removed, you need to remove the metal shield by removing these screws here, and then disconnect the antenna. Once the metal shield is away, we do need to lift the motherboard a little bit, so we have more screws to remove, including the heat pipe. Gently remove the daughter board to the side. There is 1 screw that has a cover on it. Once that's removed, pull it away. Now is as good a time as ever to pull away the rest of the ribbon cables. Again, very gently. You damage any of these and there's no going back. Then the heat pipe and heat sink can be gently pulled away again. Once you're able to move the motherboard, unscrew the screws still holding in that bottom piece of plastic. And of course, once all the screws are removed, put in the new piece of plastic and start screwing that back in, reversing the process. Make sure the USB port is under the plastic, it might get stuck. Gently start to connect the rest of the ribbon cables. Take your time here. Again, if you damage one, it's very expensive to fix. Since we had to remove the heatsink, let's clean it up and reapply new thermal paste. Once you have a brand new blob on there, go ahead, place the heatsink and screw it back in. When we place the daughter board back, it actually sits in a connection under where we're pushing now. And once it's secure, go ahead, re-screw it in. And we're going to cut a little bit of Kapton tape and just place it back over that screw. About a few screws here, so let's just quickly screw those in. And then we'll screw in the rest of the screws that hold this back plate in. Once the Wi-Fi connections are made again, we're going to cut some more Kapton tape and hold the antennas in place, just like they were when we first opened this. We're moving on to the kickstand, and it's held in by 2 screws on the back plate, which should remove the entire kickstand. The first cover can be removed gently. The second cover will require you to unscrew it from the side. Then you can just push it away and it'll lift away. You'll find a few more screws holding the joint to the actual kickstand itself. Then reverse the process to reinstall the kickstand. My mold here didn't quite fit right, so I ended up not using the covers. Your mileage may vary. Just like the other switch, the cartridge slot is just held in with 1 screw. Move it over to the new shell, along with the buttons near the top. At the bottom, there are 2 vent covers that will also need to be moved over and re-screwed in. Finally, reattach the kickstand to the joints that are on the backplate and press fit the backplate. Pay special attention around the USB port. Finally, we get to screw everything back in, reversing the process that we did to remove the backplate. And then don't forget to test with the Joycons. Except for the kickstand on my OLED, I'm very happy how these turned out. I don't recommend attempting this project unless you have experience with these ribbon cables and motherboards. If you tear one, you'll have to replace the entire Joy-Con, and if you tear one on the motherboard, I don't even know what you have to do at that point. I also don't recommend taking apart the OLED as much as we did for just the bottom piece. If it's worth it to you, then great. If not, I probably would skip. I hope this helped you reshell your own Switch, surprise someone with a Switch of their own. It can ultimately save you money if you find a beat up Switch for the right price and pay $20 some for the shell replacement. I'm extremely thrilled with how it turned out, and if you do it yourself, I hope you are too.